Well, good evening, everybody. I am Reagan, if I haven't gotten the chance to meet you yet. I serve here as the next gen pastor. So basically, anybody birth to 18, I get to hang out with. It's a great time. So today, as you already know, is Ash Wednesday. And I have the privilege of telling you guys tonight just a little bit more about what that is, what that means for us, and what that's going to mean for us in the next couple days, couple months. So Ash Wednesday is a day on the Christian calendar that leads us up to the season of Lent. It begins the season of Lent. And the Christian calendar is just a way that we organize our lives according to the story of God and the story of God's people. So we started in Advent a couple months ago. Then we went to the season of Christmas, and we moved into the season of Epiphany, and now we arrive here at Ash Wednesday that leads us into Lent. Now, typically at an Ash Wednesday service, we'll do some of the things that we've already done. We'll sing and we'll pray and hear a message. And then towards the end, we'll do something called the imposition of ashes. And it's where you will have the chance to come forward and we'll put some ashes on your forehead in the shape of a cross. And traditionally, something is said to the effect of, "From dust you have come, and to dust you will return." Now, this comes from a verse in the book of Genesis that is where God reminds Adam and Eve that they were formed from the dust, and one day they will return to dust. And so those ashes are a symbol for us of our limits as human beings. And I'll be honest, I know that "from dust you have come and to dust you will return" is not the most exciting, encouraging statement to hear about yourself. If you don't fully understand it, it kind of sounds a little bit hopeless. And it's pretty opposite of what we have in our culture, what our culture tells us. Because what we hear is kind of whatever you strive for, whatever you put in the effort for, you can achieve. You can be who you want to be, you can manifest what you want in life. But that sounds really encouraging until it's not. It sounds really great that we can do everything in our own strength until you sacrifice for someone and they take advantage of that. Or you love somebody and they don't love you back. Or you invest your life into a dream and it never comes to fruition, or it falls apart. And at those times, the world's reasoning that we can do anything in our own strength and we have the power to bring into life whatever we want leaves us feeling really hopeless and kind of hollow. So if we believe that our identity is tied to what we can accomplish on our own, then at the end of the day, we'll end up being pretty disappointed. And so the season of Lent reminds us of our sin and our brokenness. It reminds us that we are limited human beings, and at the end of the day, we need God. Now, however, in spite of all these things, we serve a good God who loves us anyway. And as we read earlier in Psalm 51, 51. It reminds us that we are to be washed white as snow because we have a good God that loves us. And as Laren mentioned, this is a song written by King David when he finds himself just extremely aware of his flaws and his limits. Like he has messed up and he is sitting in it. And so he just begins to confess. He begins to say things like, "Have mercy on me, blot out my sins, wash me clean, I recognize my rebellion," etc. He's just brutally honest with God, and he asks for God's help. So at the Christian college that I attended just a few years ago, we had chapel services a couple times a week, and we would start each chapel service the same way every time. We would start by saying this. We would all stand up and put out our hands and we would say this: "We gather here today to tell the truth. We don't have our lives together, and on our own we can't get them together. We confess that we are poor and we are hungry and thirsty for what we cannot provide ourselves. We need God's grace and we need each other." We would say that week after week. I probably said it hundreds of times over the four years that I attended school there. And as a freshman, I didn't think much of it. It was just something I said when I started off. But then as the years went on and I repeated it each week, sometimes several times a week, I began to almost find comfort in it. Because this idea that I can say that I don't have it all together and that on my own I can't have it all together just felt like it relieved this pressure off of me. Like, I know I can't do it, and so I'm not going to try to do it on my own. And I need God's grace, and I need the people around me in my life. And I think that's kind of where King David found himself in this moment. He was a man who was in the line of Jesus. He's called a man after God's own heart, and he even confessed, and he knew that he couldn't do it on his own because he tried that, and that's where Psalm 51 leads us to. So on Ash Wednesday, we begin to admit that we can't do this on our own. But the resurrection that we look forward to at Easter reaches to those places of sin and brokenness in our lives and in our world. And when we enter into this season, reminded of our limits, and from dust we came, and to dust we will return, we're able to recognize the areas that we need God, to see the areas in our lives that maybe we've taken control over and said, no, God, like I'm good. I don't need you in that area. I'll do this in my own strength. But when we go into the season and we know our limits, we see that we need God. And when we do that, we can experience what Psalm 51 talks about, a clean heart, a renewed spirit, and a restored sense of joy in what God has done for us. So Ash Wednesday, as I mentioned, marks the beginning of the season of Lent, which is just a 46-day season reflecting on the 40 days that Jesus spent in the desert being tempted. And during this time, we often give something up or participate in fasting from something to be in solidarity with Jesus. And the 6 Sundays that are included in that 46 days are opportunities for us to rest from that fasting. So growing up and in the past, like I remember coming to services like this and just trying to think as a kid, like, what am I going to give up? And then into high school and beyond, and I've given up everything from chocolate to caffeine to social media to TV, like all the things. But I want to encourage you today to think about what it would look like for you to fast from something for the next 40 days. And not to just choose something that's like a means to an end. Like, don't choose to give up chocolate so you'll lose a little weight, or choose to give up Facebook only to end up spending just the same amount of time on Instagram. The purpose of this is to give something up to allow that space that thing would hold to shape you. So I want to encourage you to begin by examining an area in your life where maybe you feel tempted. Maybe for you, you're a person who tends to compare yourself and your life to that of others. And maybe that comes from just consuming too much media, too much social media, too much of whatever that is. So maybe you limit yourself. Like, I'm not going to do that for this entire time, or I'm going to only do it for 5 minutes a day, and you stick to that. Or maybe you're somebody who finds yourself becoming more and more angry and bitter every time you watch the news for whatever reason. And so you just decide that I'm not going to do that. That's not the person that I want to be, is someone who's just filled with anger all the time. And so I'm going to choose to limit how much I'm watching that for the sake of my life and the joy that I experience with the Lord. Now, in addition to fasting from something, oftentimes another practice for Lent is that you can add something. So while I don't want to encourage you to bite off more than you can chew and say, I'm going to give up all this and I'm going to commit to doing all these extra things, I do want you to think about an area in your life that you feel like you can grow in. So maybe you take something away and maybe you add something in place of that. Now, this can look different for everybody. Everybody came in with different needs, different places in their walk with Jesus. But maybe you read a proverb every day. There's 31 of them, so it'll take you right towards the end of the Lenten season. Or maybe you participate in what we're doing as a church, where on the YouVersion Bible app, there's a QR code that's going to be on the screen here in just a moment, where we're just reading together a chapter of Matthew each day as we follow along in our series that we're doing through the book of Matthew. Maybe you choose to do that. But whatever practice that you end up doing, for me, I'm just committing to spending 10 minutes a day. We have a at our apartment complex. We've got a nice pond with a sidewalk around it. I'm just committing to doing 1 lap a day where I'm just going to walk and pray with Jesus. Doesn't matter what time, doesn't matter. I might do 2 laps. Who knows if I'm feeling really, really going for it. If the sun's out, we'll see. If it's snowing, it's going to be 1 lap. But I'm just committing to that because I know that sometimes I need that time in the middle of my day just to refocus, to reset, remember who I am in God. And so that's what I'm committing to in the season of Lent. So whatever it is that you choose to do, I encourage you to just be creative with it. To stop and think what practice you could add or take away that could genuinely transform the next 40 days for you and beyond that. And maybe you even decide to do this with a group of people or with a partner, somebody who can hold you accountable, somebody who you can kind of talk through, man, this is kind of challenging, or man, I had this great experience. So that this 40 days isn't just another season of Lent, another year, another thing, but it's something that actually shapes you, because that's why we're gathered here today. So on this day, we acknowledge our limits. And the last aspect of Ash Wednesday that I want to talk to you about is the fact that it's an opportunity for us to lament together. And lament is just kind of a Christian fancy word for saying to mourn or to acknowledge the sorrows in our life. Because on this day, we don't just acknowledge our own sins and our own limits, but also the sins of the world and how the world falls short of what God intended it to be. In Psalm 51, at the very end, King David says, "Look with favor on Zion and help her. Rebuild the walls of Jerusalem." Because as much as he's confessing his own sin, his own flaws and limits, he's saying, God, I know that I need you to help the people that I am around and the people in my life as well. And so tonight, we gather to pray and lament both our personal shortcomings and the ways that we fall short, just as David did. And we recognize that while we're not all we're meant to be yet, God is still moving and God is still working. And Ash Wednesday, for me, as I've grown up, has kind of become like this checkpoint, I feel like, in my year, where I stop to remember, to confess, and to lament, and offers us a chance to sit in solidarity with Jesus. It's kind of like taking a spiritual inventory about where you're at in this moment. And in a world that projects perfection, it allows us to acknowledge that we can't do this on our own. And we don't want to do this on our own because we have a God who's so much greater and so much more powerful than we can even imagine. And even though we are limited, God is not. So Ash Wednesday is a time where we acknowledge these things. And just like King David did, we thank God for being a part of our lives, for offering us this opportunity to grow and not leaving us in our mess. And when we thank God, we get to thank him for meeting mankind in the midst of sin and brokenness since the time of King David, and each and every year with each and every person since then, and how he continues to meet us even here tonight. So before we completely look on to Lent, I want to offer you just a few ways that you can respond tonight. You can respond by rereading Psalm 51. We're going to have it scrolling on the screens here in just a little bit, just slowly. Just read it, take it in, and as Laren mentioned when he read it earlier, just see what it's meaning to you tonight. Where are the parts of it that are really speaking to your heart? And I also want to offer you the opportunity to just pray. Just pray at your seat. Whatever posture of prayer feels right for you, to just pray, God, what would you have me get rid of? What areas am I tempted in right now that I think I could probably get rid of in my life? And what areas do I need to grow? And what practices can I implement? And these altars are also open if you just want to come forward and pray. We'll just have a few moments to reflect. And altars are just a place where we come to meet with God. It's not necessarily anything magical, but it's just an opportunity for us to move forward and come meet with God. So I invite you today on Ash Wednesday. It's a humbling day, but it points us to the Lenten season, and ultimately to the death and resurrection of Jesus, which offers us genuine and lasting hope. So I invite you to respond, and my prayer for you is that God would bless your fasting, your lament, your praise, and your prayers today and for the next 40 plus days as we approach Easter. So I invite you to respond in whatever way you feel comfortable.